Welcome now to day 7. As always, remember, hydrate the vocal cords if you're reading aloud. Set your timer for 15 minutes to start the 15-minute habitual reading habit. Start. Read for 15 minutes. We ended with, and I'd feel guilty for setting a boundary that allowed me to feel safe, if doing so also meant that I could risk upsetting other members of my family or community. This difficulty with setting boundaries would overwhelm my work and relationships in my 20s, despite me no longer being tied to the community in East Africa. It was only once I learned how to navigate these through my training as a counsellor and through literature that things began to feel lighter, more manageable. I linked my difficulty to set boundaries to my desire to please others. I was a people pleaser. To be honest, I had no idea what boundaries even meant in an emotional context until I started my training and explored them further in therapy sessions. Even then, I struggled to introduce healthy boundaries into my life. My inability to say no and the guilt that followed if I did meant that I took on more than I could manage at work and struggled with episodes of chronic stress, with the symptoms manifesting both mentally and physically. During my accountancy training, I felt overwhelmed, stressed, and burnt out, and eventually began to experience panic attacks about going into work. I could not face another day in the office. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. I lost considerable weight and eventually left the job, ironically, to join an even more aggressive investment bank, where I completed my accountancy training. And so the difficulties with boundary setting persisted. It was Anne Catherine's book, Where to Draw the Line, that really helped me to understand healthy boundary setting. Her stories of people who had struggled with boundaries and had successfully managed to let go of their people-pleasing tendencies made me feel optimistic that I could do it too. She wrote practical examples of how to actually set them. In theory, boundary setting seems straightforward, but the application of it often felt hopeless. I was convinced that I would never be someone who would assert themselves without feeling guilty when they needed to say no to a work project, or who could ask for more time when making a decision, or who would respectfully let their family know that they needed space. But I discovered that change was possible, regardless of the difficult space and narratives in which we find ourselves. As a people pleaser, you learn to please everyone around you but yourself. Acknowledging that I had the agency to please myself first before worrying about the needs of others was life-changing. Although I felt guilty for putting my own needs first by working through my concerns through literary journaling, I found I could accept this new way of being. I can now see red flags as soon as they appear. If something feels odd or strange, I don't gloss over it. I stop and pay attention to it. In the past, I would convince myself that I was the problem. A partner dismissing my emotions as being oversensitive, a friend repeatedly showing up late, another friend only getting in touch when they needed something. These were all red flags that I should have heeded. My boundaries were not being respected, perhaps because I was not seeing them. I was not saying, it's not okay to treat me like this. By staying silent, I was participating in my own boundary violation. Learning to recognize boundary violations was important, but even once I had, it was still difficult for me to voice my feelings due to a fear of rejection and a sense of guilt around hurting someone else's feelings. I knew that I had to do something about these emotions. As Anne Catherine writes in Where to Draw the Line, the longer we stay in a violating situation, the more traumatized we become. If we don't act on our own behalf, we will lose spirit, resourcefulness, energy, health, perspective, resilience. We must take ourselves out of violating situations for the sake of our wholeness. Having worked a great deal with clients on fear and anxiety in the therapy room, I knew that one of the best ways to deal with fear was to accept it, honor it, and then face it. For the sake of my inner peace and mental well-being, I had to let others know how I felt in the hope that my feelings would be acknowledged and their behavior would change for the better. My guilt stemmed from my tendency to put the needs of others over my own. And I knew I had to put myself first and honor what I needed. To do otherwise would be a betrayal. After journaling on the idea of setting healthier boundaries, I put what I'd learned into practice. And remarkably, there were friends and relatives who changed their behavior to accommodate my newly set boundaries. They heard me and respected my needs. Of course, there were those who didn't, and this process helped me identify them and weed them out. Suddenly, life started to feel less complicated and overwhelming, although it was bittersweet as I had to let go of some relationships that had been a key part of my life. It was messy and hard at times, but once I had mourned these losses, I realized I could make peace with them and move on. Adulthood. After therapy and becoming a parent, I'd made leaps and bounds in boundary setting, yet there was still something niggling at me. Something was missing. It wasn't until I read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye that I realized what it was. In the book, Morrison confronts racism within the Black community, the struggle of being a woman in a patriarchal society and class dynamics, all of which felt incredibly familiar to me. Although deeply disturbing, Morrison's writing resonated with me, and I felt that she astutely captured emotions that we all experience, although in perhaps less violent ways, from never feeling good enough and being othered to our longing to be loved and accepted for who we are. In the novel, Picola's desire for blue eyes rather than brown ones not only highlights the racism that she has internalized, but also emphasizes her longing to be truly seen by those around her. For Picola, blue eyes are symbolic of beauty and of the love, respect, and acceptance she craves. Picola's story reminded me of my own invisibility growing up as a girl in an East African Indian community, where there was a clear division between the women and men. The men were seen as superior. When boys were born, their mothers were celebrated. When girls were born, their mothers were consoled. Women would do all the cooking and cleaning while the men relaxed in the living room and engaged in intellectual conversations. Although girls were sent to schools and prestigious universities overseas, their primary duty was still to serve the needs of men. For women, marriage often meant swapping career prospects for the joys of being a housewife. At least, this was what was modeled by the women in our communities in my late teens and early adulthood. And in a similar vein to the pursuit of whiteness experienced by Picola in our community, there was also a bias toward being fair and lovely. To be slightly darker skinned as a woman was frowned upon, so you would avoid tanning at all costs, which, in sunny Kenya, proved challenging. This is where I found Morrison's writing helpful. The experiences of Picola and other female characters in the novel highlighted the intersection of sexism and racism, the ways in which society's expectations of beauty and femininity can be oppressive and harmful, particularly for women of color, creating and sustaining power imbalances that contribute to the marginalizations and subservience of women, particularly for those who do not conform to traditional beauty standards. There was also the question of social capital and status. How wealthy was your family and how many siblings did you have? Did you have a large extended family? The larger your family, the higher your social standing and social capital, and the more valued you were as connections were currency. Growing up, these beliefs and silent social structures took root. I never felt good enough. I came from a smallish family. I was female and measured somewhere in the middle on the whiteness spectrum. These pervasive ideas followed me from the past into the present, and even as an adult, the feeling of invisibility managed to filter into many of my relationships and experiences. I carried with me the conviction that I didn't matter. Over the years, the community has evolved. There's not much of a fair and lovely culture anymore, and it's a lot less patriarchal. But the seeds of invisibility from my younger years have been firmly sown within. The sense of not feeling seen was also compounded by my professional environment. When I worked in finance in London, a patriarchal culture still existed, and the office was predominantly white and male, although now there's more diversity and inclusion initiatives in place. Sometimes I would walk into a meeting room and say a bold hello, but people would either look straight through me or their body language would indicate their dismissiveness. The message seemed to be that there was no space here for a petite British Indian female. The same was true for other non-white female minorities. It was an incredibly difficult world to exist in. I want to share a reflection from my journal after reading The Bluest Eye, which I think gives a sense of how the book helped to crystallize and acknowledge my feelings. Of all the things that have troubled me in relationships, setting appropriate boundaries, being too nice, and always putting others' needs in front of mine, the things that persisted is this deep desire to be seen, to be visibly available to others. Picola's experience, while extreme, reminds us how deeply the communities we are raised in can haunt us, their power omnipresent, affecting how we experience the world for the rest of our lives. To the point that we unconsciously attract the same type of communities in later life, whether that's friendship groups or work cultures, where the familiarity of invisibility is more comfortable than taking up space, which can sometimes feel unnerving. The wish to be seen, to be heard, to be witnessed is primal. Those of us who grew up meeting the needs of others, often those of men, and putting the needs of others before our own, can frequently end up feeling like we've never been acknowledged and that our emotions, needs, and desires were neglected. As seedlings, we were left to fend for ourselves under the scorched sun without adequate nourishment and care. Audio journaling. Although I understand what motivated my desire to be seen, the problem lay in fixing it. The emptiness refused to go away. I was navigating a path with a starless sky. This time, instead of writing down my thoughts, I audio journaled. I began to leave myself voice notes. I told my inner child, who had felt neglected for so long, that I was there for her, that I understood her pain, that I was sorry she felt so alone. I cried. I let myself feel the pain, the sadness, the hurt, the abandonment, the fear, all the emotions from my childhood that I hadn't fully resolved. Audio journaling, how it works. The beauty of audio journaling is that you can capture your raw emotions in their purest form as you experience them. A voice note is an accurate snapshot of how you feel in the moment, and it can offer a way for you to release your frustration, fear, and anger, and channel these emotions into something more productive instead. Physiologically, when we give voice to our feelings, our tense muscles loosen up. There's a mental and physical sensation of releasing pent-up emotion. You start to make sense of what you journaled and your feelings. Suddenly, the important things stand out. There's more clarity than there was before. Recently, audio journaling has also been recognized as a helpful reflective practice by various researchers in New York who have worked with teenagers in Jerusalem, Gaza, and New York City to record their experiences of audio journaling for self-reflection. How does audio journaling differ from literary journaling? Audio journaling will appeal to anyone who finds it easier to verbalize their thoughts rather than organize them on the page. It's also a good technique for people who are more auditory than visual, who find it easier to absorb information through listening rather than seeing. It is particularly helpful for those with lower literacy, linguistic difficulties, or disability. Listening back to your audio recordings will allow you to feel that your voice has been heard, understood, acknowledged, and validated in a literal sense. something you might not experience as viscerally when rereading your journal entries. Audio journaling also captures the emotional context of a statement, which is often missing in the written word. For example, "I need to change" can be interpreted in many different ways on the page, but a voice note offers an indication of the intention behind the words. And there we go. There's another 15 minutes. Day 7 done, and we're up to page 70 of Bibliotherapy, The Healing Power of Reading by Bijal Shah. I hope you're reading along with me. If not, go and order the book and let's read together. Let's create a habit. Let's get you to be above average. Day 7, you're already above average. Congratulations. See you tomorrow.